that creative expression had to come out somehow. It was I would just die. Imagine someone would just discover me slumped over the keyboard at work one day. I'd have just died of depression. So I had another passion, which was writing. However, at the time, as family does, my mother was saying, you can't leave the BBC. It's a great position. It's a great title. You're earning lots of money. Just stay there. So that pressure from my mother basically was overwhelming. So I decided to stay, and I ended up staying there for about 7.5 years.
Have you ever felt stuck in a space that just doesn't see you? That's where today's guest, Shamsul Rosunally, found himself. After years in the corporate world, he walked away to follow a deeper passion, storytelling and culture connection. Shamsul's journey hasn't been paved with perfection, it's been shaped by pivots, resilience, and the courage to say no. From navigating self-doubt and burnout, to balancing fatherhood and family life, he's had to redefine what creativity means on his own terms. In our conversation, Shamsul opens up about leaving behind a career that left him feeling invisible, discovering storytelling as a lifeline when work drained his creativity, the realities of being a father, mentor, and designer in a fast changing industry, and why owning your story is the most powerful creative tool you have. We also touch on everything from embracing AI to cultural icons like comedian Lenny and filmmaker Ryan Coogler, to the importance of not becoming a victim to your circumstances. I've known Shamsul for years, but this was the first time I really got to know him, and trust me, this story is one that so many creators will resonate with.
My name is Shamsul Rosunally, the designer. I started off as a designer quite early at university. I had a passion for computers and multimedia. After I left, it was just a passion at that time because I was just so into video and digital platforms. So I eventually ended up in a startup company that did documentaries about wars and generals. We were kind of like at the cutting edge of that technology. I quickly became a senior designer within that company, and that was it basically. I just wanted to conquer the industry. I joined the BBC around 1998 as head of creative design, so it was kind of like a big boost at the time, and I was so ambitious and so gung ho about working with BBC titles and BBC products. And I thought, I'm going to conquer the world, basically. And then when I joined the BBC, it wasn't anything like that. It was very corporate, and it was a bit of a shock. There was actually very little creative work, even though I was brought in as a creative to give my point and to guide these titles and products. It was incredibly boring. It was just a struggle to actually get up to go into work because there was literally no work to do. And I found that a complete shock. So after a year, I wanted out. I just basically wanted to leave the BBC and try something more dynamic, because
Yeah, I understand. Creative, you want to express yourself in many ways, and if the job doesn't give you that, then you've got to think about the alternatives.
absolutely. And the thing is, with corporations, they kind of lock you into how they want you to be and how they want you to express yourself, right? Which is fine. You're working with very big titles and very big brands, and however, my situation was actually worse than that. It was a case of like, we would only come to you when there's a problem, right? So instead of actually introducing me early on in a project cycle, they would basically just come to me when there was some firefighting that needed to be done.
That must be really frustrating. How did that make you feel when they kept on doing that?
It was very annoying, I have to say. I would come in and then, it had that kind of creative dread that you would actually not be able to contribute or express yourself. So you would come in, I would literally go cap in hand to all my colleagues and say, have you got anything for me to do? Right. And inevitably there wasn't. And it was like most
Yeah.
people in you are earning loads of money and not actually doing any work. But for me, it was like, it was so absolutely soul destroying. It was horrible. Yeah. There's only so much you can do during a day. There's only so much surfing the internet you can do. There's only so much chatting to your colleagues you can do before you think, I can't stay here anymore. However, at the time, as family does, my mother was saying, you can't leave the BBC. It's a great position. It's a great title. You're earning lots of money. Just stay there. So that pressure from my mother basically was overwhelming. So I decided to stay, and I ended up staying there for about 7.5 years. So in
Yeah.
the meanwhile, that creative expression had to come out somehow. It was I will just die. I can imagine someone would just discover me slumped over the keyboard at work one day. I'd have just died of depression. So I had another passion, which was writing or films specifically. And then so at the time, I kind of had this kind of illusion of like, or this kind of like ambition of becoming a film director. So I found out that one of the other departments had a digital suite, which was incredibly expensive and only used very little. And I jumped on there and started learning the software and the hardware. And then I decided I wanted to do a very short film. So I got a whole bunch of family and friends to help me do a 16mm film, black and white, old school 16mm, and transfer that to digitally and edit it digitally. It's very, very early on, and I edited it, and it was like it came out. I thought it was quite good at the time, but the whole experience put me off because it was like directing is actually very hard work.
Yeah.
But
But
and
you
then
were,
through that,
yeah. But to say you were experimenting, so you probably wanted to try out different,
yes,
mediums. So
but I kind of examined the whole process, and I kind of said, well, the writing was probably the most interesting part to me, and so that's how I started. I literally would come into work, I'd answer a few emails, and I would just sit there writing, and it kind of got me spurred on. And then an opening happened. They closed down the department, and I was lucky enough to join a small startup company that still used the BBC brands, but basically was in a small office in Chiswick. That gave me an opportunity to actually be creative, and when it was wonderful. The CEO was just a guy called Dominic Wheatley, who had made his millions selling Tomb Raider. He had worked at basically the company that came up with the original idea of Tomb Raider, and basically he wanted to start up a new company. So with his millions of pounds, they started this company, and he hired the BBC team who had just been made redundant. So I was part of that team, and it was wonderful because he just said, "This is what I want. Go off and do that, Shamsul." And it was like, "Wow, yes, I will." And he gave me a lot of freedom.
yeah, it feels like you needed someone to basically give you that encouragement, and it sounded like you got that from him. Do you think he was like a mentor to you and encouraged you?
Not as such. A mentor, I think, would be someone who I'd learn from, right? And he wasn't so much someone who learned because he was kind of him being a CEO. He was very kind of like one. He had to be one step away or two steps away from the employees because he was that sort of like person who would like a very Alan Sugar, Donald Trump sort of character. It was like, I'll give you 2 or 3 weeks to produce this thing. That was the fact that he trusted you and he involved you early on. Basically, was great. So in the meanwhile, I hadn't told him. I was already on a script writing course at the Royal Holloway University, and I had specifically joined the Royal Holloway so that I tried to get into UCLA Master's Writing course, and so in in that period of time, I got an interview at UCLA, managed to get a placement for 1 year as a student abroad on a student abroad program. UCLA Masters of Screenwriting is harder to get in than Harvard Business School. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But it was, it's incredibly it's prestigious, and it's like, and everybody wants to get onto that course. So when I managed to get that, I said, right, that's it. Basically, I'm going to hand in my notice and basically go off to Los Angeles for 1 year. So that was the journey of like, starting to write, because I was bored at the BBC, kind of, and that was like the next natural step.
That's amazing. I was also fascinated about people who are creatives, that they feel they have to pivot, regenerate, and kind of reinvent themselves just to be who they are. And I think you've definitely done a lot of pivoting in your career. I've been curious about your screenwriting, your writing, your storytelling. Where did that stem from? Have you always been a storyteller or interested in writing? Where did that come
Yeah, I think that comes from my mother again. She was a huge influence on my life, because obviously she was someone who managed to get into what you call a public school in Malaysia. She's originally from Malaysia. She managed to get into a very prestigious public school just on her own merit, and that was like one of very few. It's a very famous one. Not within, we wouldn't know it, right? But if you mention that to any Malaysian, right, they'll be like, "Oh wow, your mum went to this school." She even though she's very she's very kind of, you've got to go to university, you've got to go and do this or whatever. She's very into that kind of like, you need to prove to everybody, etc., etc. So she was also an incredible storyteller. Right? So basically, you'd sit down with her, and she would either tell you something about Malaysia, or she would tell you something about how she came to this country, the UK, and through her career met all these people, and she had the ability to draw you into a story and then keep you engaged for half an hour, but in between doing things like cooking and whatever. Yeah, and I think I've inherited some of that storytelling thing, but obviously it's, I've kind of focused it towards the writing. And I think say for example, I'm discovering now my daughter has that ability as well. So it's so yeah, that storytelling, script writing element has kind of come from. I think it's that that wish to express yourself, to tell stories. I think is incredibly important. So I think that's really where the inspiration has come from.
Storytelling is very important, you know, it's a way of communicating, obviously, but you kind of feel like it's been handed down generations, even though they might not know that they're doing it. Like your mum, obviously, she said stories that she probably just thought was just like, chit chat, or maybe something that was important
Yeah,
to her. But
yeah,
in the background, subconsciously, you probably were learning and absorbing all that information,
exactly,
and
exactly,
it rubbed off onto you.
exactly. She would never tell you you're not really doing this right, you're not doing that wrong. She would suddenly launch into a story, and then you wouldn't really know that she's trying to guide you or educate you while she's telling that story, and you wouldn't realize it until like a few hours later when you've left, and you thought she was trying to tell me this, right? And then that's the power of, that's the power of story, the fact that you can guide people, educate people, and if you do it in a skillful way, they wouldn't even realize there is an insidious kind of like side to that, but I think there's also a very positive part of storytelling as well. And so it's interesting as we get into the TikTok era, and we're coming out of TikTok into kind of more specific kind of information era, that basically you can heavily influence someone in a negative way as well as a positive way.
You mentioned something that you're a writer for, is it TAPS? Can you
Oh
explain
yes,
what
that's correct.
TAPS
Yeah,
is?
yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
what's TAPS?
So again, that was another previous life, another kind of like, the word pivot basically is quite used quite commonly now. If there is one word that can describe me, is like I pivot. It may not seem obvious to people what I'm doing, but it's just, I have to feel like it's natural. So it was when I came back from UCLA, I realized that basically I needed further education, because the thing of UCLA is it's a wonderful environment. It's a wonderful course, right, with wonderful teachers who are directly connected to the film industry, but they cannot guarantee that you will end up being a good writer. And that's even though it's like, one of three best schools in the US, probably in the world, for screenwriting and film direction, the success rate is still minute, right? Because, and I think I had a healthy attitude when I went into UCLA, which was basically, I'm here to learn. I know nothing. Whereas quite a lot of the other students used it as a way, it's sort of like a willy waving exercise. Basically, they thought because they got in there that they were the best, right? And so they didn't kind of have an open heart or open mind to kind of learn, right? So when I came out of UCLA, I realized I was still very bad at writing, and so therefore I needed to put myself in an environment where basically I could still learn. So I applied for this job at TAPS, which was very well established. I'd never heard of TAPS, right, because I was never
What
part
can
of
you
the.
explain what TAPS is for those who are not familiar with it?
It was a company that actually, it was a charitable organization that basically created and put on courses to basically help writers improve their writing. So they could come from nothing at all and then so try to take them to the next step, or they could already be established writers. And some of those writers had done episodes for Casualty or Doctors or whatever on BBC
Understand, yeah.
TV or BBC TV and ITV. So they would basically help them again kind of pivot or help them fill the gaps in their knowledge so that they could basically improve their writing and basically make those connections within the industry. So unfortunately, the company went bust a few years after I'd left, which was a real shame because it was a fantastic scheme to basically take writers on and say, look, we can help you make those connections. We can help you improve your writing by introducing you to more established writers, right, and see whether you can get you. So it was an amazing time.
What was your experience there? Did you obviously you learnt something there? You learnt a lot, but how was your, relating to other writers? And did you see anyone who looks like you there?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Obviously, that was at the time. Basically, there was an interest to actually help bring on writers, but specifically also focus getting governmental money, governmental grants. Was the notion that you would bring on writers from the BAME background. So it was very much part of the scheme to basically look for those writers, whether it was from Asian or Afro-Caribbean backgrounds. Me being in in a, on the other side where I'm part of the admin going through that process, there was two things I discovered. It was very much a ticking process where basically we did it specifically so that we could say to the local authorities or government, saying that yes, we had this amount of Asians and this amount of African Caribbean or black writers or whatever. And it was difficult trying to encourage people to actually come, because actually there wasn't enough writers out there to actually fill the slots. So maybe at times the quality of the writer wasn't great, specifically because we had to tick that box. Part of the problem was those it was the same faces that kept on turning up at the courses and whatever. So there wasn't enough. And then I thought about, well, why wasn't there enough, right? And I think it's you can't really blame. You can't say it was like outright racism or something like that, or prejudice, right? It was very much a case of like, I think people from our background, we don't come from families that encourage us to be creative. So therefore, the very few people who were coming through, they'd stepped out by themselves and established themselves, and so they kept the same faces and the same names kept on appearing. So I
Yeah,
found
you
that
got
really.
a valid point about people who are from you know ethnic minorities, they're kind of like from the medicals or doctors or lawyer kind of
Yeah,
backgrounds.
yeah. But this is kind of a reciprocal thing. It's like I don't, I think that's a symptom, a symptom of the the situation environment in England, right? At the time, you have to remember this was the time before you saw brown and black faces on TV. You never saw that many brown and black faces on adverts or television. That I guess people will say, well, if I'm not represented, so therefore why should I basically maybe even enter that industry or whatever? I a few years later after this, I saw that kind of wonderful um, talk by Lenny Henry at BAFTA. I think it was
Yeah, I did
2014,
see
right?
that. Yeah,
Yeah, and it was such, because you can't basically say to people, this is the reason why you don't have enough people from ethnic minorities in this profession. It's because of racism or basically prejudice or bias or whatever. There was no way of quantifying that and sort of like saying, this is my evidence, right? So therefore we need to keep pushing that so that we can encourage more people to step forward and take a chance, right? And to earn money so that they can have a career, right? Because we can't encourage them to have a career because there's no possibility. So why should they make the effort? But having someone like Lenny Henry say, look, get up there. Obviously, we grew up with Lenny Henry, but I didn't realize he was so eloquent and so diplomatic. Because he never kind of really wanted to shove it down people's throat, and he did it in a very kind of diplomatic way, right? Which basically, and I thought he was amazing.
yeah. Just to add to about Lenny Henry, people who don't know who Lenny Henry is, he's a well-known comedian in the UK, and he's been a producer, a writer, and also I think with regards to what Shamsul was saying, that there was some. I'll put in the notes. He's got a proposal as well that aligns to what he's discussed in the BAFTAs.
Mm.
He's got a proposal that's out available, and I'll link it down below. But yeah, Lenny Henry, he
And
has
he
done
and
a
he went to
lot.
Royal Holloway as well, which is what the same university I went to
Really?
to actually do screenwriting. Yeah, a few years
Yeah,
afterwards, I think he did his
yeah,
masters there. So he
yeah.
he obviously he was pivoting as well because he
Mm,
very successful comedian, stand up, then went on to television, then has done TV series. But he obviously came to the point in his career where he's like, I need to try something else. So became so he went through the same motions that everybody else does. But obviously he had ready access, right? But I, I'm hoping that at some point he'll do another BAFTA talk because essentially that 2014 speech was a review of his 2008 speech, right? And so I'm hoping that he does another review and it sort of like says, okay, things have moved along, but here's where we need to kind of keep pushing. But things have changed. There are more writers, but at the time when I was at TAPS, you could see, it was excruciating to hear people talk about, but there was accusations of particular writers from particular backgrounds being, oh, they're too lazy, they don't want to sort of like, and it was absolutely infuriating to hear that, right? But at the time, it was like, look, I'm here to work. I'm here to encourage writers to improve our shut and deal with it. When you're in those kind of circles, you hear absolutely terrible things, right? And you think
can imagine. Yeah,
you're the reason why.
it's
Um,
the way it is.
it is, and it was it was shocking to me to hear those things, right?
You probably
Because
you think, yeah, but to say you have to keep your mouth shut because you don't want to lose your job, and you do your the most that you can, but it's not good enough. They want you to do all the great stuff, all the admin stuff, but they don't want you to give you a promotion, for example.
well, it was a small company. There was no there
Mm,
was no there was no way I was going to run a company
fair
or
enough.
whatever. I had no ambitions to run. I was still essentially a writer.
Okay.
And I desperately wanted to do that. But as when I put myself alongside those writers who were coming on the course, I said, I'm just not ready. I think that's kind of like, I think you have to be and wise about your situation. You can't. It's easy to beat yourself up, but if if you come to a fight and you haven't, you don't know how to fight, then you're going to lose very quickly. So I didn't want. I was. And then with writers specifically, whatever you write is your little baby. Once you put it in front of it, as a writer, you are very vulnerable, right? So you put it in front of the wrong people, or even the right people, and your work is not quite there, right? They may be harsh, they may be subtle, but you take it on, and that can be very heartbreaking at the time, because it's like, what are you calling my baby ugly, right? And it's like, it's not a nice thing to hear, right? And so you have to develop quite a thick skin. And even now, I don't think I've got a skin that's thick enough to actually deal with that, because but now I think I'm in a better position to kind of like argue why this is important in a script. And I think you need to, as a creative, you need to take on criticism, and you need to be guided as well. In this in the media industry, there really isn't as many mentors as you kind of want, right? And I feel like there's probably only like a dozen people that you could go to, right, that actually could open doors or could guide you or could help you. And then we just need more of those sort of people. So now, I'm very kind of much like, I'm going to be a mentor to my children, whether they like it or not. It's like, I'm going to teach you script writing. I'm going to teach you how to think differently, because the schools won't do that for you now. It's very academic. It's about writing English or maths or whatever, which is great, but the creative element has almost completely disappeared. You have to pay extra. So I'm trying to fill that gap with my children, and trying to prepare them for like the onslaught of AI, which I've embraced, and teach them about storytelling and structure and character design and character art, 3-act structures, and all the things I learned from UCLA and from Royal Holloway, and all the things I've learned since.
I think as a parent, you are a teacher in some ways to your kids, and I think some things you can't teach, life experiences, and you're passing that down. That sounds like a great way of getting them to learn about what it's really like, especially if people who don't look like us. And you have to
Mhm.
prepare them for that, because there's not only you have to be a creator, you have to deal with how people perceive you on the outside, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think that's certainly changing. I think that landscape is going to be completely different in 2 to 3 years' time. The kind of it changed. It has changed. You do see a lot more Black and Asian creatives, which is wonderful. Too little, too late, as far as I'm concerned. Being someone who's been around at the right time, I wasn't around for that at the right time, unfortunately. I think there was like a generation of Asian and specifically Black creatives who basically were first in the line to basically benefit from this change, who were just kicked to the side because someone else was who behind them basically came along. So you see that a lot of people from African or Indian backgrounds who fit that kind of that brown and black face kind of like have benefited, whereas all those people who have come, who basically made first generation, second generation Asian or Caribbean background, have basically just been ignored because, okay, you weren't around when the purse was starting to open. I would find that really frustrating. It's like, everything has changed for the good, but it was I wasn't there to receive it, and I feel kind of like slightly cheated. I'm very much a person that says, look, I don't want to be a victim. I don't want to sound like a victim. It's like, you have to move on. That philosophy of like, stop blaming others. Because at the end of the day, if say for example, say it's white males who've basically been in charge of this industry, were reluctant to let other people in into their kind of, they worked very, very hard to establish that. They worked incredibly hard and incredibly talented, and if they didn't want other people to come in, I can understand that, because they're protecting their patch, right? And if, unfortunately, they're a bit racist, they're a bit prejudiced, right? you know um and we missed that boat, unfortunately, when they were forced somewhat to open that door. Maybe I would have been the same. I don't know, right? I'd like to think I wouldn't be like that. I would be more inclusive. I'd be less discriminatory. But until you're into that situation, you won't know. Now we're in this situation where you can't kind of say we were cheated, we missed the boat or whatever, because there'll be another boat coming, right? And then we got to be ready for that. What surprised me is the AI movement, right? Because now, if you have those particular skills, which is basically a creative skill and an ability to understand their technology, now the color of your skin doesn't matter at all. The film industry, as an example, right? Sinners has made the rounds in a theater, and it is an amazing film, right? A film that basically kind of like shows you that, look, there are other stories told in a different way that can be completely engrossing, completely. And yes, it had to go through the traditional kind of film development channels, but it was like shocking to everyone, right? Because it's like, wow, this film has basically made a hell of a lot of money, right? And is artistically um, sound and production wise, and everything's sound on it, right? So basically it's and you can't deny what it's done. Right now, everybody would like to sort of like say, Black Panther was that film. Black Panther, I don't think it was. I found that film a little bit grating, because it was like, it felt to me a little bit kind of like pushed down your throat, right? And because, okay, it showed you a different way of looking at the world through the African culture, and them putting Wakanda on a kind of like saying, look, yeah, you people from that, but it's all fantasy. It doesn't actually mean anything, right? But whereas this one, okay, still fantasy, but it kind of shows you that basically, look, it wasn't what was portrayed on screen that was fantastic. It was the way that it basically it introduced a different way of telling a story, and that was wonderful, absolutely wonderful to see. It was I was mesmerized.
Yeah, I just like the way how the Sinners movie was, as we're talking about this, it's a lot to talk about, but there's how Ryan Coogler mixed the past, the present, and the future in one moment. That was very interesting, where he directed that. And also the main character, Sammy, I can relate to, as he had to hide his creativity as a person of color. I won't give any spoilers if anyone hasn't watched it, but when he had to hide he's a musician and he had to put his guitar under the bed. I just feel like as creatives, and especially in those times, you couldn't be expressive. So, and even though it was an extreme situation, I think even today, some people who are underrepresented, whether they're neurodivergent or disabled, whatever, their creativity is with that's not them. They can't. They don't want to be known or the disabled designer or the black creator. They just want to get
Yeah,
on and be creative.
absolutely, yeah.
But yeah, there's lots of things in the movie that a lot of people can resonate with.
Yeah,
So
I think
yeah,
it was a real eye opener to me, but not in the sense that it was surprising and unexpected. I think it was like there was like an elation that it's finally come, and it seems like maybe I'm bigging it up a bit. Essentially, as a film, it had still problems with it, right? But it was just I don't know, artistically, and it was just basically and storytelling wise, it was just engrossing. It was just a wonderful piece, right? And so maybe some other people might actually look at it and say, well, what's the fuss about
Interpret it differently.
you won't understand how significant it is until you basically, and unless you've come from a creative background and kind of understood the struggles that he's obviously had in actually making this thing and actually doing it from specifically his point of view, right? From him. So yeah, it was like, and it gave me, and I thought, it was like, oh, fantastic, that's come along. It's like you're sailing on the ocean in the dark, right? And suddenly that lighthouse switches on its light, and now I know where I am and where I'm going. Yeah, and I think Sinners represents that, as well as, say, for example, the AI kind of scene that's coming. It's a wonderful way of democratizing the landscape, right? So basically, now there's not only particular channels that you have to go through, and say, for example, they don't like or don't accept that, then you won't be able to enter through that door. Now it's just, you can see where the door's going to be completely wide open, right? And it doesn't make any difference. Now you've got Sinners on one hand, and you've got AI on the other hand, right? Now you can see how basically, yes, people are interested in our stories, and now I don't have to kill myself or try to prove myself before I can get my story out there, because AI will basically eliminate that. And so I think that we're in an absolutely wonderful situation where basically you have to prepare now as a person, an ethnic minority or any particular minority. You have to pivot yourself now and prepare for when the technology catches up, and then you can tell your story, because there will be no one there to kind of like look at your resume or your CV and say, yeah, thank you very much for applying for this position, or thanks for getting in touch and talking to us, but maybe it doesn't fit what we want to produce as a company. That will completely change, right?
Yeah, I think you're future proofing yourself, really. And I know there's a lot of discussion with AI. Some people are scared of it. I think it's just a tool at the end of the day. It's how you use it. So yeah, your AIs are definitely, it's here to stay, and we'll just have to make sure that we
I think I have
understand
to,
it.
yeah. Like everyone, I think at the back of your mind, where how it can be abused, and abused really badly, right? But whether you like it or not, this morning I was listening to a podcast about GPT, and how students are using it to cheat, obviously, and it's become it's become epidemic. There's ways around to get around their kind of like testing, and see whether it's through ChatGPT or whatever. But I've told my children, these are the tools. Basically, you still have to you can't expect the AI apps to actually do everything for you. You still have to put some legwork into it. You can exploit it, but you still need to be creative. You still need to understand character arcs, 3-act structures, all the things that are really important to storytelling. You need to understand that, and I'm slowly educating them. But I also I'm embracing this and saying, look, this Chat GPT, it can help you rewrite your scene or whatever, but don't expect Chat GPT to produce something for you, because it'll be rubbish. Yeah, maybe one day it'll be fantastic, right? But until then, basically, you still have to put the legwork in, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's very interesting days.
Yeah. I've got a segment called Studio Draw. It's a play on words. That's kind of the messy part of your behind the scenes of you being a creative, the bit that no one talks about. So, what is something in your desk or studio drawer that you use to design with that you can't do without?
When you're creating, or specifically for me, writing. Now, all my focus is on writing. I do still do some of the design the characters for my screenplays. It's basically, once you find a comfortable setup, right, it has to be there. So I have all the electronic gizmos that you could possibly think. I could write anywhere at any time using anything, right? But the somewhat frustrating situation is that now I've connected my PC to my living room TV, right? And I
Right.
sit on my sofa and I basically sit there with my, all my gadgets, right? And I'm the absolute most comfortable in the living room, writing in front of my TV on the sofa where I've made a little nest, right? Unfortunately, it's the main room of the house. So basically, at any given moment, my children or my wife will just come in and then completely distract me. And it's just so annoying. I've tried to go to internet cafes. I've tried to set up my own space or whatever, but it just doesn't feel natural. That's the thing that I've unfortunately I've got to the situation where it's like now I have to plan my days and plan my. So luckily I'm an absolute early riser, so I'm most days at 6:30 in the morning. I'm already in front of the TV writing stuff.
Yeah.
And I get maybe 2 to 3 hours to myself before the kids get up and start asking for breakfast.
Are we saying that the sofa is something that you can't do without?
I can't do. Yeah, it's bizarre, but it's a strange. It's not an object. Most other people would be like, it's like I need my special mug or I need my special pen
Yeah.
or whatever. I don't need any
Yeah.
of that stuff. I
Fair enough.
just need to be comfortable where
Mm.
a big screen, and that's all I need. Yeah.
The next question I have for you: what is the weirdest source of inspiration you've ever used in a project?
Weirdest. Again, coming back to writing rather than design. Uh, it's not so much weird. I think they often say write from what you know, uh, and the the screenplays I write, I inevitably always come back to my relationships with my children, my wife, and my parents, and my family and friends. Yeah, so I draw from that. So sometimes the characters um, may speak in a particular way or say something, and then say, for example, my daughter or someone's reading the script. I'm just looking at them thinking, have they noticed I'm using their voice in my script? They don't often kind of make the connection, which is like, phew. But yeah, I think sometimes I draw quite a lot of my humor and drama from the people around me. It's not so I'm not usually basing the characters wholeheartedly on them, but I'm drawing from a conversation or something like that. So it doesn't fall into the category of weird. It's really a case of like they might find it weird that I'm drawing personal conversations or experiences into my storytelling. They might find that really weird and uncomfortable, but actually, whether it's animated characters or something set in space or whatever, you do have to draw from what you know, and I think that's really important.
Last question: what is something chaotic about your creative process that you secretly love?
Chaotic, that I secretly love. Oh god, that's an interesting one. Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, the thing is that writing is generally quite chaotic anyway. So I won't state, I'll try out ideas or try out things, and then I'll kind of like develop it, and I'll see where it's going, and then but I'm happy to ditch it, because I think that sometimes people get too engrossed in one idea and thinking and putting all the effort into this one idea, only to find out that it's terrible by the time they finish the process, or if someone feeds back on it. I try not to be too precious about stuff. So I can flip flop at times, but I'm at the back of my mind, I'm kind of weighing in whether this is commercially viable, commercially viable and creatively appealing to someone, right? So basically, I'm doing those calculations in the background. I'll develop something, and then at some point, I might just ditch it. And most entrepreneurs have the same kind of like mindset as well. They'll try ideas. If it fails, they won't rest on that and sort of let's say, oh, I failed, and so they move on to the next entrepreneurial idea, right? And then try that until something. Yeah, it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall. Sooner or later, will stick, right? And I think writing or design or whatever, it's kind of like it's always chaotic at the beginning, but sometimes it's a method in the madness, really. Someone outside will think, what the hell are you doing? You tried this last year and then you tried this year. Just stick to one after and get a kind of like, well, you just stick to one thing and just do it. And it's like, and I don't think creative process is like that. You
No,
try stuff. Yeah, you go to
exactly.
you try, you push it. If it reaches the end, fantastic. But if you have to abandon it halfway through, then drop it. Don't feel too precious about it. Move on. And I again, same kind of philosophy I use with my children. I say, look, you develop this idea at any point you feel that this is not good enough or you get bored or whatever, start something new. And I think you really do have to have that kind of mindset to say, look, I have to try something new. This hasn't worked out, to try something. And that philosophy also relates to the work environment. I think we're in we're a different kind of era now where you do have to pivot. You do have to kind of like, because no one can predict what's going to happen, right? So you have to have that ability to kind of try stuff, drop it, and then try something else, and do that quickly, not to kind of like stay too long in this thing. And and then that will happen organically and naturally. So I think for my kids, the other thing I'm trying to teach them is like, you don't get too precious about your stuff. Try to try stuff out, try something new. But when you do find something, go 100% right, focus on that, try to get to the end. Yeah.
I think you've answered my question I was going to ask you next. But I'll throw it out to you anyway. You might have come up with
Yeah.
some other solutions. This is the last one for you. If you could leave listeners with just one piece of real, no BS advice about thriving creatively, what would it be?
Being creative is not just about you, it's about other people as well. So it's maybe you may want to express yourself, but there might not be a recipient on the other end to basically listen to you. Or you may be shouting in your own kind of like vacuum, because either you've created that vacuum or someone else has created that vacuum. So and so you just have to try stuff, and then if it doesn't work, just move on to something else. Again, rather like business, if it doesn't succeed, being expressive, it's not just about the one idea, it's about many ideas. And it's not just about you. You have to trying to communicate to one other person. It could be one other person, but it's about communicating. And yeah, I think ideas more than often are collaborative, and I think it changes once you communicate with other people. If people like your ideas, they'll tell you straight away, and if they don't like, obviously they'll be critical. So you need to I think you need to basically talk to other people, and I think that's one of the reasons why I was like really happy to talk to you about it, because it's like the process is very painful, yeah, but it's that urge, that uncontrollable urge to express yourself, or try to find a way to do it. And you have to feel your way around in the dark. You have to kind of like speak to other people, talk about your ideas, and then basically, and in the meanwhile, give back to other people. So basically, it's like, how can I help you express yourself? How can I help you achieve your goals? Really, I think my piece of, if there was ever a piece of advice, it's like it's a two-way street. You have to give and you have to take. Yeah, you can't just be like, you're going to just listen to me and that's it. If you don't like my idea, then I'll just move on to another one. It's not quite like that. It's
Yeah.
like, I think you got to be able to listen to other, and then, rather like storytelling, I had to listen to my mother before I could basically become before I became a storyteller. You have to be able to listen to other people before you can basically start opening your mouth, I think. So yeah.
That's great. Thank you. That was absolutely wonderful. If there's anybody who wants to reach out to you, how would they get to, you've got social media handles? How can they support you in your work as well?
You know what? I used to be a really good networker in the past. I've been reluctant to do this until I'm rather like a butterfly coming out of the cocoon for the first time. I'm ready to spread my wings, but I'm not quite there yet because I want to basically present something to. So if someone wants to support me, I'm happy to provide an email or whatever. And if I'm happy to support other people or whatever. So I'll send you. I don't have a media kind of a social media kind of like presence at the moment. I'm just emerging from the dark again. I've been in a cocoon for a little while, and
Make it sound like you're Batman.
yes, yeah. And then when I make my splash, you better be ready. I'm telling you.
Okay, Batman.
Shamsul's journey took us from being a designer in a corporate space to embracing his voice as a storyteller and filmmaker. What stood out to me was the tension between working in environments that stifled creativity and his drive to tell stories that matter, especially those that amplified underrepresented voices. Like so many creatives, he faced systematic barriers, a lack of mentorship, and the frustration of feeling cheated by an industry that often overlooks diverse perspectives. Yet instead of staying silent, he leaned into storytelling, sought mentors, and embraced pivots that allowed him to reclaim his creative freedom. The result was an overnight success, but transformation. Invisibility became impact, vulnerability became strength, and the career pivots became fuel for growth. Shamsul's journey reminds us that your creative path doesn't have to be linear to be meaningful. As you reflect on this episode, ask yourself, where are you still hiding your story from the world? How could the challenges in your creative journey spark a new invention? And who could you reach out to as a mentor or ally to lift you forward? Thank you for listening. If this episode challenged, inspired, or stirred something in you, hit subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it, because bold voices and messy journeys deserve zero apologies.